On a crisp autumn morning in the foothills of the Alps, near the breathtaking border where Austria meets Germany, 62-year-old Thomas Müller, a retired schoolteacher from Munich, woke with the kind of quiet excitement that always came before one of his day hikes, the kind of adventures that gave rhythm and meaning to his retired life, small escapes into the embrace of nature, where he could breathe deeply, reflect, and feel part of something greater than himself. The early morning light stilled gently through the curtains of his small apartment as he packed his backpack with a practiced ease. A bottle of water, a shiny red apple polished against his sleeve, a sandwich wrapped neatly in foil by his wife the night before, and a folded paper map, its edges soft and worn from years of use. He smiled as he thought about the path ahead, a familiar area of trails that he had walked many times before, and he promised his wife with calm assurance that he would be home in time for dinner, just as he always was. She kissed his cheek lightly, reminding him not to wander too far, and though he laughed, brushing off her concern with a wave of his hand, those words would echo in his mind many hours later when darkness closed around him. At first, the forest felt like an old friend, steady and familiar. The golden autumn sun filtered through the towering pines, their needles glowing like green fire in the morning light, and the air smelled of damp earth, crisp leaves, and distant wood smoke from villages below. Birds flitted overhead, calling to one another in cheerful bursts, and the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his sturdy boots gave a rhythm to his steps. Thomas, a man who had spent decades in classrooms teaching children about literature and history, often said that the forest was his new classroom in retirement. And on this day, he wanted to soak in every lesson it had to teach him. He paused often to admire the details of nature, the way frost clung to blades of grass in the shadows, how a squirrel darted across the path, carrying an acorn, how the chill of autumn seemed to sharpen the sounds of the forest into music. At one point, he even lifted his small camera and snapped a picture of a stag grazing in the meadow, its antlers catching the light like polished wood, a vision so regal that Thomas whispered aloud, as if to his absent grandchildren, "Look at that, children, isn't he magnificent?" For a moment, everything felt perfect, peaceful, and secure. But peace can be deceptive, and curiosity, so often the beginning of discovery, can also be the beginning of danger. As the hours passed, Thomas reached a familiar fork in the trail, and though he normally turned left toward the marked loop that would bring him home by late afternoon, his eyes lingered on a narrow path leading right, unmarked, weaving deeper into the woods like a secret waiting to be uncovered. He stood there for a while, debating, feeling the familiar pull of curiosity. He imagined perhaps it would lead to a hidden overlook, a view of the mountains he had never seen, or maybe circle back to join the main trail again. At 62, Thomas was still adventurous, proud of his independence, and eager to prove to himself that his age had not robbed him of courage. So with a decisive nod, he followed the narrower track. At first it was enchanting. Smaller trees clustered close, shafts of light pierced through in golden beams, and the ground was littered with colorful leaves. Yet the deeper he went, the less certain he became. The path narrowed until it seemed more like an animal track than a human one. And after another hour, he realized he had lost sight of any familiar markers. Still, he pressed forward, telling himself he would soon find his way back. But the forest has a way of turning confidence into doubt. By early afternoon, a thin unease crept over him. The unmarked path began to vanish into tangled undergrowth, splitting into smaller tracks that faded into shadows, none of them resembling the paths on his folded map. He pulled the paper out, studying its lines, but the dense green maze around him seemed not to match anything on the page. The sun, which he had been using to keep his direction, slipped behind gathering clouds, leaving the light dim and gray. He took out his phone, hoping for GPS, but the screen showed only emptiness. No bars, no signal, nothing. His heart beat faster as he looked around, suddenly aware of how silent the forest had grown. The cheerful bird song of morning was gone, replaced by a heavy, almost watchful quiet. He turned and tried to retrace his steps, but every tree, every bend, every moss-covered rock looked like the last. Panic rose in his chest as he walked faster, his breath quickening, until he had to admit the truth with a chill that cut deeper than the mountain air. He was lost. The realization pressed on him like a weight. He shouted once, then again, calling into the trees, "Hello, is anyone there?" But his voice echoed back, hollow and empty, swallowed by the endless forest. He tried to calm himself, whispering reminders that panic was an enemy, but fear clung to him like a second skin. His stomach growled with hunger, his throat felt parched, and though he still had his apple and sandwich, he knew they would not last long. He thought of his wife, likely glancing at the clock by now, expecting him soon. He imagined her pacing the kitchen, her worry growing as the dinner table sat empty. As the night crept closer, the sky darkened quickly in the mountains, the clouds heavy, the air turning colder with each breath. He had no tent, no sleeping bag, no firewood. Evening was coming, and the forest was no longer a friend. When the first night closed around him, Thomas's fear deepened into something primal. He gathered branches with shaking hands, stacking them into a crude shelter at the base of a tall tree, and he huddled inside, wrapping his jacket tight against the bitter wind. The ground was cold and unyielding, and every breath clouded in front of his face. The forest at night was alive with strange noises he could not see. Every snap of a twig made him jump. Every distant cry of an owl echoed like a warning. Every rustle of leaves sent a shiver racing down his spine. He could not sleep. The cold gnawed through his jacket, and his heart pounded too fast for rest. Hunger gnawed at his belly, thirst dried his throat, but worse than either was the loneliness, the crushing knowledge that he was utterly alone in an unforgiving wilderness. He thought of his grandchildren's faces, their laughter, when he returned from hikes with stories of animals and trees. He thought of his wife's gentle smile that morning, and the promise he had made so casually to return. He whispered into the dark, over and over, "I have to survive. I have to make it back." Those words became his anchor. Back in Munich, when he did not return by nightfall, his wife felt her heart tighten with dread. By midnight, her worry turned to fear, and she called the local authorities. At dawn, a full-scale search and rescue mission began. Alpine rescue teams, seasoned in the dangers of these mountains, mobilized with speed. They brought trained dogs with noses sharp as blades, drones to scan from above, and helicopters ready to search from the skies. Local villagers joined, forming search parties that spread through the forest in lines, their voices echoing as they called his name again and again. They knew the truth that Thomas also felt. In the cold mountains, with no food or shelter, every hour mattered. A night alone could mean hypothermia, dehydration, or worse. They had to find him before another night fell. Meanwhile, Thomas forced himself to move the next day, knowing that to stay still was to surrender to the cold. He stumbled upon a small stream, kneeling to drink with cupped hands, the icy water shocking his lips and throat, but keeping him alive. He pulled the apple from his pack, slicing it into thin slivers with his pocket knife, savoring each bite as though it were his last, and he tucked the sandwich away for later, unwilling to eat it yet. knowing he might need it even more when the hunger grew sharper. His legs trembled with fatigue, his head ached with hunger, and the weight of fear pressed heavy on his shoulders. At one point he slipped on wet leaves and tumbled painfully down a slope, his knee slamming against a rock. Pain shot through him, and he lay there for a moment, groaning, staring up at the gray sky through branches. Despair whispered in his ear that perhaps he would never leave this place. Perhaps he would be one of those hikers whose names were spoken with pity. Tears welled in his eyes, but then, with trembling effort, he pushed himself upright. He thought again of his wife, of his grandchildren's small hands in his, of his classroom, where he had once told children that perseverance was the key to all learning. He told himself he must live his own lesson. Step by step, he whispered. Keep moving. Keep breathing. Don't give up. And so he walked, slowly, painfully, but determined. By the afternoon of the second day, his strength was fading dangerously. His lips were cracked, his body shivered violently, and his vision blurred from exhaustion. Yet still he moved, dragging one foot in front of the other, clinging to hope. Then, faint but undeniable, he heard it, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades echoing across the forest. His heart leapt. Somewhere, high above, people were searching for him. He waved his arms weakly, shouting with what voice he had left, but the thick canopy of trees swallowed him from sight. On the ground, however, one of the search dogs lifted its head, catching a faint scent. It barked furiously, tugging its handler deeper into the woods, pulling them toward where Thomas stumbled, like a shadow among the trees. Moments later, rescuers burst through the undergrowth and saw him, pale, shivering, barely able to stand, his clothes torn and his face lined with exhaustion, but alive. They rushed to his side, their voices calm and reassuring, wrapping him in thick thermal blankets, pressing a warm cup of tea into his hands, and telling him again and again, "You are safe now. We have you. It's over." Tears streamed down his face as relief flooded him. He was safe. He was going home. When the helicopter landed in a clearing and lifted him into the air, Thomas felt his fear lift with it. The vast forest stretched beneath him like a dark ocean, and he realized with bone-deep clarity how close he had come to vanishing within it forever. At the hospital, doctors treated him for mild hypothermia and dehydration, and though he was weak, he would recover fully. Within days, he was strong enough to embrace his wife again. Their reunion a flood of tears, laughter, and gratitude that words could barely capture. Later, Thomas spoke openly about his mistakes. He should never have left the marked trail. He should have carried more supplies, a whistle, perhaps even a small emergency blanket. He admitted he had underestimated the wilderness, treating it as a friendly playground rather than an unforgiving, indifferent force. But he also spoke with deep respect for the courage of the rescuers, men and women who had risked their safety and given their time to search tirelessly for him. And he spoke of the strength he found within himself, a strength he had never been sure he possessed, the ability to endure hunger, cold, fear, and despair, and still push forward with the stubborn will to live. His story spread through local newspapers, touching thousands who saw in his ordeal both a warning and an inspiration. A forest is breathtaking, yes, but it is also unforgiving, and those who step into it must do so with preparation and respect. Always tell someone your route. Always carry extra supplies, food, water, and warm clothing. Always be ready for the unexpected. For survival is not only about strength or knowledge. It is about preparation, patience, and the refusal to surrender. For Thomas, 24 terrifying hours lost in the European woods ended in a miracle of human resilience and the dedication of strangers who would not stop searching. For others, such stories end in silence. His survival is both a comfort and a warning, a lesson to be carried forward. As he now tells his grandchildren, every trail is beautiful, but every trail also carries risk, and the greatest wisdom of all is not simply in walking it, but in returning safely home.